In this video, I'm going to analyze a game that I played. This was a blitz game, and it's probably one of the craziest games that I've analyzed. It is so tactical and messy that even after looking at it with a computer, I still can't really say that I understand everything that's going on. So I'm just gonna try to keep this video as short as possible, because if I go into all the variations of sub-variations, this would be a 10-part video series. So the game started with d4, d5, and here I played knight f3, and my opponent played knight c6, which I don't think he knew this would transpose into a Chicoran defense after I go c4, which is what I did. And here he played a move that I've never really seen, and I occasionally played the Chicoran as black, which is to take the pawn, because I think this already gives white an advantage, even though Stockfish apparently likes the move, d takes c4. If you look at the database, it hasn't really been played that much. So here I played e4, taking control of the center. The engine though prefers d5, and you actually have to go back with the knight, because if you go knight a5, well, then there's this variation with queen check and c6 protecting the knight, as well as blocking the check. And after bishop d2, b6, because you were threatening to take the knight once again. And well, after you capture the pawn, you can go queen c7, but you can also go queen d6 queen d5, which would result in a trade of queens, but it's very similar. You take, and well, now the pawn structure for black is just a mess, and white is just better in this position. So instead, I went e4, and my opponent played e6, which is not a very good move. I found quite a lot of games with bishop g4, and this position has been reached by many top grandmasters. In fact, so many that I won't even mention all of them, but there's probably at least a dozen of them. So after e6, I just recaptured the pawn, and my opponent checked with bishop e4. I went knight c6, and my opponent captured. The best move was to go knight f6, continuing development. And well, after bishop takes with check, then I just recapture and I reinforce the d pawn, which is very good. And again, I tell my students, if it's not forced or fantastic, then it's foolish. So trading the bishop for the knight, it's not a very good idea, because you're giving up the pair of bishops and you are strengthening a white center, and well, you're also opening up the b file, which can be exploited by the rook at some point. So after that, it's interesting because I looked at it with 3 different engines, and one engine thought that queen e7 was a small inaccuracy, and whereas different engines think that this is just a really bad move. I personally don't think that this, from a practical point of view, is so bad, but I do think that maybe developing the bishop or going for knight g7 would have been better. And here I castled, and now my opponent goes knight f6. And here I decided to sacrifice the pawn with rook b1. It's actually not a very good sacrifice. White apparently doesn't have sufficient compensation for the pawn. So the engine says, well, I can take it, and after queen c2, you don't really have that much. Although this is Komodo, so again, different engines say different things, but Stockfish at a depth of 24 says that black is just fine. So my opponent went a6, and now I went rook e1. So I'm not just protecting the pawn, but I do have potential ideas of pushing the pawn, and if you capture and capture, well, then I'm just gonna not really win a queen, because you can block it with a bishop e6, but it's starting to get a little dangerous for black, and for that reason my opponent castled, and I continued with bishop g5. And here my opponent played a move which the engine really doesn't like, which is rook d8, and I just went e5, thinking that, well, I'm not really that much better because my opponent can play something like h6, and if I take, well, actually I'm attacking the queen, so that doesn't work. But here actually my opponent surprised me with this move, knight takes e5, and I thought that I'd just blunder the pawn, but white's position is so good that it really doesn't matter. There's 3 ways to capture the knight, and they're all winning. Now I capture with the knight, which is the most natural move, but even this is good for white. After rook takes b5, takes on f6, gaining a tempo by attacking the queen, and after the recapture, bishop d5, another in-between move, attacking the rook, and white has a rook and 2 minor pieces for the queen, and I mean, is the black king weak because of the pawn structure, or is black better? I mean, this position is just crazy. I mean, how do you evaluate this? Really, I don't know how to evaluate it. And after knight takes, well, my opponent played this move, queen a3, which I don't like because you're not continuing your development. The bishop is still on its original square, and this rook is still not in the game. Whereas if you look at white's pieces, well, all the pieces have been developed, well, except the queen, but the queen is actually well placed on its original square, because it's has the potential to go to either the king side or the queen side. And here I played rook b3, although actually bishop takes f6 is winning. After the recapture, there's this check, and well, here you obviously can't go to h8 because you get mated in one move. So after king f8, there is this crazy sacrifice, knight takes f7, and you are just getting like blasted off the board. And if you take, I mean, if you take, you are losing, but if you do pretty much anything else, you're also losing. So after rook b3, black got greedy and took another pawn, which is not a very good idea when you're behind in development. And here I hallucinated and took on f7, but actually this is, well, it's an interesting move. It's actually still winning for white. The point is, well, here my opponent just played b5, but if king takes, you still have bishop takes, and if pawn takes, queen h5 check, and after king g7 you have rook e3, and apparently the attack is very strong. Notice there is no back rank checkmate because you always have bishop f1. So with the two pieces and the king exposed, you have the queen and the rook. I think that even if you misplay this with the white pieces, you should have a perpetual check. So this is pretty good for white. So after b5, I went rook b4, attacking the queen, and after queen a3, I just took the rook. And well, I'm losing the bishop, but I'm gaining the rook, which is pretty good, all things considered. After queen f3, well, I have two threats. I'm attacking the rook, and I'm also threatening to take, and after takes, queen takes, and black is getting checkmated. So my opponent played rook a7, because if you go rook b8, well, I just take it. And now I took the knight, and here my opponent decided not to take back the bishop, which is also what the engine suggests. Look at the top three moves. Do not take the bishop. So when the engine doesn't want to recapture the piece, that means that if you do, then you're probably getting checkmated. So after queen a5, I went bishop e7 with the obvious threat of checkmate. My opponent went queen f5 to stop it, and I played queen c6. I guess the boring way to win would be to capture the queen, and well, now I'm up a knight and a rook. So, and if you look at black's position, I mean, what do you do with the black pieces? Like, just look for a move to make with the black pieces. Rook a8 looks ridiculous. You can't really move the king except to h8, which looks just as bad. If you push the pawn, I mean, okay, the rook is gonna come down to b8, and you're gonna lose the bishop. So I guess you can play something like g6 or h6. This just looks hopeless. So after knight c6, my opponent went h6 because of the threat of queen check followed by checkmate. I still went queen e8 check, and after king h7, I went knight f7 with the threat of queen h8 check, which my opponent probably should have allowed that threat with something like c5. And after queen check, king g6, this looks bad, but it's better than what happened in the game. After this, my opponent just blundered with king g6, and here I just missed mating 2, which is understandable when you're winning the queen with this move, knight d6 check. But if I thought a little bit longer, maybe I would have found a knight g5 check, and it's mating 1. And that's mate. So if you have a choice between checkmating your opponent or winning their queen, just take the queen. So here my opponent played this move, which looks like a computer move, just giving up the queen like that. And after queen takes, king h7, bishop f6, threatening checkmate. My opponent took the knight. I guess he thought maybe I would not see the rook's attack and just take and get this position. But even this mistake is still winning for white. I mean, just look at the evaluation. A bishop against two rooks. So after queen takes, queen check, and here g4 is mate in 1. So yeah, this was a very interesting tactical game. I'm sure if you're tall or morphy, you could probably play decently, but for mortals like the rest of us, playing good chess in these types of positions is anything but easy. So I hope that you liked the video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe and share. So thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.